Welcome to Playthink, conversations about games, interactivity, art, and culture. This podcast is recorded live at the USC Game Innovation Lab, which is part of the USC Games program at the University of Southern California. For more information, follow us on Instagram at USC Game Innovation Lab or visit our website at gameinnovationlab.com/playthink.
Hi everyone, here and online. My name is Maynard. I am a writer and game designer, and welcome to Playthink, a podcast hosted by USC Games where we get to talk about all things play and the wonders within. Today, I am going to be interviewing my friend and mentor, Tracy Fullerton, on her new book, The Well-Read Game. Let's do a round of applause for Tracy! So, Tracy is an experimental game designer, professor, and director emeritus of the USC Games program here at USC, University of Southern California. Her research center, which we are recording from, the USC Game Innovation Lab, has produced a number of influential independent games, including Cloud, Flow, Dow 4 is Dying, and The Night Journey with artist Bill Viola. She is the designer and director of Walden, the game, an adaptation of Henry David Thoreau's experiment in Walden Pond, which was awarded Game of the Year and Most Significant Impact for Games for Change 2017. Tracy is also the designer of the Game Design Workshop, my favorite textbook, a play-centric approach to creating innovative games. A foundational textbook on the use of games program worldwide, and holder of the Electronic Arts Endowed Chair in Interactive Entertainment. She's great. We love her. We're talking about her book, what it means to be well-read, and in case I forgot to say my own name, I'm Maynard. I'm a writer and game designer, and I'm an alumni from here. So, yeah. Tracy, should we jump in?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that extensive bio.
I mean, you are an institution, and we're happy to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I wanted to start with your game, or book.
My book?
Yes.
Yeah, well, there is a sort of crossover in thinking about them, since books figure prominently in this book about games.
Good, because I want to talk about what we talk about when we talk about reading, because I was under the impression that I understood what reading was, and then you and I had a conversation in fall of 2023, and I realized that reading is ripe for transformation in how we understand it in literacy, especially digital interactive literacy today. So starting with that, how do you define reading in a game, and what makes someone well-read in games?
Well, we're jumping right to the heart of it. The concept of the well-read game is really bringing together theories in literacy and playful thinking in a way that allows us to privilege the player's experience and their interpretation of that experience. And also, it allows us to I would say, value that experience in ways that we haven't before. So to answer your question a little bit more directly, the concept of reading, and this is not my idea, but the concept of reading today is broadening to multimodal texts. So texts that go beyond simply the written word to the visual ideas, visual languages, such as those we find in films and television and games. Also, the interpretations we have of audio experiences. We can also, in the book, we go all the way back to the way that John Dewey talks about art itself as an experience, right? And, for us, that's very important, because if we're going to define our experience of art as something that goes beyond just an object and is more about what it is that we experience as, interpreters of art, interpreters of literatures, interpreters of games, then we can talk about being well-read as players. We can talk about being an active reader of our own experience of games. So that is what we do in this book. We really establish the idea of games as multimodal texts, and we talk very specifically, we built our concept on reader response theory from Louise Rosenblatt, but also player-centric situational design from Brian Upton and from my own work, right, where we think about the game not as an object but as an event, something that is evoked when a player actually plays a game. They create an event that they can interpret. So that is the basis. I think I've rambled on past your question a little bit.
I don't think it's rambling. Again, this is one of the reasons why every time when we started having this conversation over a year ago, I had to go back and like, do I understand what reading is? Or am I like completely ignorant on the subject? Because by your definitions of reading, you know, you use words like evoke, you use words like event, you use them as happening movement sort of verbs. And it's really interesting that you talk about, you know, theories of art and Brian Upton's situational game design, because my own references go much further back to, you know, the construction of some of the great architectural wonders that came out of the Catholic Church, right? I am a bit of a junkie when it comes to people talking about art. So one of my favorite art YouTube channels, Artless, talks about how in the Middle Ages, people couldn't read books, but they had high visual literacy. So they could look at stained glass of John the Baptist and know it was John the Baptist based on his iconography.
Exactly.
And that was so important for community building, for experience building, about the ritual of going to the holy place.
Exactly.
In your community. So when we talk about reading and experience, I think this is a very old concept.
It is a very old. I love that reference because it's funny. That was one of the inspirations behind the game Walden, right? Is that, you know, many young people don't want to read the book. Mm-hmm. and you know, you mentioned this in some of the questions you sent me about the sort of loss of interest in the written word, right? Mm-hmm. As we become, you know, more and more interested in these more multimodal texts that are on our phones and that we experience. You know, we experience news through imagery more than we experience it through text, right? Things like that. One of the reasons for the game of Walden was because I wanted to bring that situation alive, that philosophy alive for people, and then send them back to the written text with some reference, with an emotional reference that would make that resonate with them more.
Yeah.
Right.
It's so interesting. I think one of the biggest arguments that comes out of your work on Walden, and kind of I think is implied in your book here, is that, you know, whether we're considering a lot philosophy or rhetoric or argument or just a story, these are contextual experiences. And, you know, I actually did do this during in prep of our interview. I did read Self-Reliance, the essay. Oh. And I was like, only someone in the woods would actually come to such a self-reliant philosophy where I have to build everything myself, and if I get good at it, it can be expected of others. At least that's what I took from reading it very quickly. When we talk about games as places where one goes to read, I'm really curious about what this means for people who design games and people who play games and that relationship, right? It sounds like we're giving, or at least acknowledging, a certain onus on the player to read responsibly.
Well, absolutely. I think too often with all media, we sort of expect to be handheld through what does it mean, right? Or do we not care? Do we just want it to be loud and boisterous and fun, right? For me, I would love to see more experiences, playful experiences, that pushed back onto the player, or at least gave space for the player to find their own interpretations. A lot of my creative work as a designer plays with this possibility, and a lot of the games that I enjoy play with this possibility. This idea that the text of the game itself, the object of the game itself, is not the final say. on what the game means. The event of a player making choices within the game, but also interpreting those choices, that is for that player the say, what it means. I get to say what it means to me.
Yeah.
One of the things we did when we were writing the book was we talked to an English professor, Lawrence Musgrove, who had this wonderful picture that he had drawn. He had asked his students what happens when we read, and had them draw all these pictures. And then he sort of brought them all together. He's also an illustrator. And he brought them all together into this picture of this little guy, the reader, this little person. It's kind of androgynous, so it's a little person with a funny nose, shaking hands with a book. And, what happens is then the reader has a response. In this version of the cartoon, there's no picture, but in some of his other versions, there's a picture of the reader holding a little bag. And that signifies what the reader brings to that experience, their baggage, so to speak, right? Yeah. All the other experiences that they have had, all the other feelings that they have about reading, about the story, that this particular text tells, and they bring that to the experience. So when we spoke with Lawrence, we asked him, can we build a similar kind of a diagram to explain what happens when we play, right? And so we did. It's in the book, and I'll just describe it. It's a picture of a little controller shaking hands with a little player, and the player's holding a bag to signify their baggage, right? And we have some thought bubbles similar to the original response diagram, but we made some changes. So in ours, the game has a little thought bubble with a button in it, because that's the language the game speaks in. It's there to signify the systemic elements that the game speaks in. And then in the player's response bubble, there's also a button, because they speak the language of the game, right? They speak in systems. And that is how most people think about games, that it is a kind of a system that you learn, and generally you're just trying to beat it, right? Beat the other players in it, beat the game, whatever, right? But we have some other things in our thought bubble. One is a heart, to signify the sort of emotions, those ephemeral feelings that we have when we play a game. And the other is a jewel, because we think that it's almost like an epiphany, this treasure that we bring back from play. That when we play and we have these emotions, what we come out of that with is a treasure. It's those fleeting ephemeral moments that you have when you're like, you take a breath, right? And you're just thrilled by something that's happened, or something that you've realized, an epiphany that you've had about a puzzle, or about something another person has done, or about a moment where you failed but you realized something, or even about a moment where you connected to a story or a character or an event and it took you back to something in your own life, right? And so for us, what happens when we play is all of those things are generated. And, to me, that is the beauty. That is the beauty of learning to read games, because often when we go then to talk to our friends about the game, what we talk about is the button. We talk about, and then you did this and you did that and you jumped and oh man and blah, blah, blah. Or you got this many points, or I got this reward, or whatever. But what we should be talking about, I think, is the treasure. Yeah. I should be talking about how I was, in this game called Lost Words, and I was standing on this whale, and I was playing this character who was traveling on this whale across this sea, and this character was dealing with a loss, this grief, and I had to stop the game because it struck me so deeply in regards to my own sense of loss of a particular person. And I had to stop and kind of take a breath and realize, it's okay. And then when I turned the game back on and played some more, I was like, yes, it's going to be okay, right? we should be talking about moments where games made us feel things like that.
Yeah.
And I think if we do talk about those things, that first of all, we will start to demand more of games, and people will start to design more games that allow for those experiences. And second of all, culturally, games will become spoken of as more than simply, you know,
Profound waste of time.
or, you know, shooting practice.
Yeah.
They're the low media on the totem pole. And every time something bad happens in our society, we point at games. But what about the good things that happen because of the games that we've played? Nobody has a model for it because we don't talk about those good things, right? And I want us to talk about those emotions, how games can help us get past grief, how games can help us connect with others, how games can help us have epiphanies about important parts of humanity, right? If we talk about it, then you can't just point at games and say, this is the only thing they do is they teach people that they can shoot guns.
It's so funny. I have two thoughts about that. One, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it. I didn't sign an NDA or anything. I recently was asked to be a contributor on a book chapter with a bunch of clinicians about whether or not video games promote violence. And I was the only designer. And so I had to be the person in the room arguing them down.
Yeah.
Me versus 8 MDs. Imagine how that goes. Well, what's great is that they were also able to do their own research and be like, yeah, we found a whole lot of nothing.
Right.
Which is great because, you know, common sense or cooler heads wins the day. But that was a cultural message that I found myself having to swing at with people who read things through health. And read things through social development. The other thing I want to talk about in that wonderful diagram is how I think it's good for people who make games or people who want to make games to take up tabletop role-playing games.
Oh, yeah.
Because in that diagram, both diagrams, the player brings something with them.
Yes.
And it's going to come out in the play space in some way or another. And if you want to be a more flexible designer, if you want to be a more holistic designer, you are going to need to find a way to make that space welcoming for whatever is about to come up.
Yes.
Because now you're co-reading. You're reading together. Whatever the multimodal text is in the theater of the mind, in the artifacts you use, all of a sudden they're interfacing with each other, and you have to align on readings. You have to make space for different readings. It's a real exercise in real-time empathy. And I use the word exercise because, going back to classical philosophy, Plato considered play a form of pedagogy. And he talked about play as exercise. Now, he's talking about the athletics, working out kind of play, right? The games they had were very athletic games, but he said that was key to the democratic development of a society.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is actually a key theme in the book.
Yeah.
Not necessarily coming from Plato, but coming from Louise Rosenblatt, who believed that becoming a better reader made one more fit for a democratic society, right? So practicing the art of reader response means not only being an active reader, but also being part of a community conversation about what's being read, right? So we talk a lot about this in the book, about how we might think about being better readers of games could also make us better contributors to the discussion around games. We have techniques actually around co-reading, which you're bringing up, and co-playing of games. And we talk a lot about bringing the ideas of literature circles into the realm of play. So that's actually something I'm hoping to bring here to USC Games, is a kind of reading circle around games. right, and play. And, you know, it's something that I've always talked to my students about journaling games. You know that it's one of the first things I say to you guys in class is you should be starting a game journal, right? And that's a good technique. But what I've realized in talking to others about the most meaningful play they have is that journaling is just a start. And it's actually a really good foundation, especially for those of us who are introverted, to begin by journaling about our play. But pretty quickly, one of the best things you can do is co-play, especially with children, adults and children co-playing, or even siblings co-playing. So talking about your play while you're playing with someone else provokes new types of ideas, provokes new types of dialogue. And so if we're journaling and we're thinking actively about the emotions and the ideas we're bringing back from play, but then we're also speaking with our friends, our loved ones, our community, our extended communities about the play that we're having, we're developing kind of language for interpretation that then serves us well as you move that out into any other kind of democratic dialogue.
Yeah.
Right? And we're not doing a good job, by the way, I think, in our society with teaching people how to have dialogues. One of the great things about art of all types is that they are there so that we can have dialogues about them. We can rehearse the idea of dialogue when we read a book, watch a movie, go to a play or play a game. We can then have a dialogue with our friends and family about that, with our extended community. We are rehearsing what it means to have a civil, constructive dialogue so that when we get to more contentious ideas, we know how to have a dialogue.
Yeah.
Well, it's clear that that's broken down, right? So this is, I think, an imperative that we build these skills. And if people don't want to read, which we find is kind of but maybe they want to play and build those same skills. Maybe we can build those same skills into our society around play.
And I want to talk about this idea that people don't want to read. I think
I'm just joking.
Oh no!
I think a lot of people
You're right.
do.
You're right. I find myself thinking about reading. I think of reading as any sort of exercise that produces literacy with the text.
Okay, I would back off for 1 minute and say so to me, literacy, basic literacy, is the ability to understand the basic nouns, verbs, adjectives of the media, whatever it is. And I would say play has its own nouns and verbs and adjectives, etc., right? That's a basic literacy.
Yeah.
Being able to read literature is when we go beyond, because literature is ambiguous. It's it has there's a great quote that we got in this book from English professor, and she calls it literature has pores. The idea being that when you are literate, you can read what we call efferently. We can get information. I can read my tax forms, okay? If I have basic literacy, well, maybe not tax forms, they're tough, but if I have basic literacy, I can read stop signs. Let's say I can read street signs. I know I'm not supposed to park there on street cleaning day, right? I can read a menu. I can read important basic things in life, and I get efferent information, that is actionable information, okay? And reading efferently is a skill, and no doubt it is an important skill, and many students today struggle with efferent reading, with basic literacy, right? Yeah. However, one of the drivers that actually increases literacy is the desire for things like stories, the desire for play, the desire for more. When I remember my little brother had trouble, he had dyslexia, and he had trouble reading, but we gave him comic books, and bam, he became a reader. And pretty soon he's reading Shakespeare, right? Why? because he wanted something there. There was a desire that drove him to learn those skills, right? So what I'm trying to point to is that for me, basic literacy is where we can read the information. The ability to read literature, to construct and imagine from these words a world, to compare across that world to your own world, and to sort of open the windows of that world and look into somebody else's experience, you know, to really sort of seep in and understand that the pores of someone else's life, right? That's what I mean when I'm talking about reading.
Yeah.
I'm talking about reading literature and reading games as a kind of evocative literature, right? Yeah. Not just, hey, if I press this, this guy's going to jump.
It's kind of like in that diagram, literature might be what happens when you're holding hands with the controller.
Holding hands in a really respectful, like, complex way.
Yeah.
We didn't just, Yeah, I think, I mean, there's so much to talk about here. The other thing you touched on in your question that I wanted to come back to was making space for other experiences. Yeah. And towards the end of the book, we actually, we talk about playing against the authorial intent. Because some people come, say, with a different cultural background or a different gendered background, right? They come with such a different experience that they don't want to play the game the way that you designed it, or they can't play the game the way that you designed it, or for reasons of their own, they just don't play the game the way that you designed it, right? There's this beautiful story in the book about Grand Theft Auto, and one of the designers was talking to an audience, and an Iranian woman came up to him and said, "Oh, I just love Grand Theft Auto." He's like, "Really?" And she's just like, "Yeah, because I get to drive a car anywhere I want." And your head just blows apart, right? Because you're like, well, of course she loves Grand Theft Auto, right? There's a freedom in that is extraordinary, right? So I think that's wonderful, and I think that there's a lot of instances, for myself included, as a woman gamer, and also I think maybe as a weird gamer, I've always called myself an orthogonal player. I like to play against the way the game's supposed to play. I find myself often in places in the game where you're not supposed to be. Yeah. Or stopping to notice things which I find extraordinary, and I know that I'm supposed to be just running past. Yeah. Right? And I think that's okay. Yeah. I think that playing against the intent is also a beautiful thing, and you can read through in any form. Like I can watch a film, or I can read a book, and I can read through the primary character's experience to my own experience. I remember reading Robinson Crusoe and thinking about, I wonder what Friday's really thinking, I wonder, because Robinson Crusoe is kind of a jerk. So, like, maybe Friday's not thinking what he thinks, right? And I remember just thinking, yeah, we can read through these experiences to the other characters, right? And it's the same, actually, with Walden. I've always loved the fact that he names all of these formerly enslaved residents of the pond. He names people like Brister Freeman, for example, or Zilpha White. So these are former slaves who also lived out in the woods. But he doesn't ever use Emerson's name in the entire book of Walden. He never names his, mentor. And I always think, oh, that's so interesting that he names these people who usually are nameless, And he allows us to read through this narrative and to not focus on those people in the town, to focus on the smaller things going on in this world, right? And I always thought that was kind of beautiful.
Yeah, that's incredible. I love, well, jumping off of that first, the last thing you said, I find myself going like, I wonder if he was just writing to his teacher when he wrote the first drafts. He's like, this is what I've been doing for the last year. So that's why I haven't
Maybe. They
named
had a
you.
kind of contentious relationship, and
Yeah.
at one point they kind of didn't speak for a number of years. So I think he was writing against his teacher. That would be my theory, is that he was actually not writing to please Emerson, but to be sort of provocative.
Yeah.
But that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, no, and you bring up something that's really interesting about reading, and it actually really shines through your examples, is that, reading a game is not the same thing as experiencing the story. And I'm putting in air quotes around the story.
No, exactly. I'm not talking about that. Reading a game is not just, reading the lore or following the through line of the author's intent.
Right.
I'm talking about your experience,
Right.
reading your own experience, and actively recognizing the aesthetics of that experience.
What's so incredible about your description of reading is how it's an agency building exercise, or an agency building verb.
Yeah.
If I decide, like as a YouTuber, I want to do a pacifist run of Last of Us Part 2, I go, good luck. I don't see how that's happening, but good luck to you. But that's reading. That is 100% saying, like, I know what you want me to do, but I want to know what I can do.
I want to know what I can do.
And I believe there was an interview with, I want to say the CEO/creative director at Bethesda, where he says, there's a story of the game, there's a story the player plays, and then there's a story they tell their friends, which is the war story. And it says, we designed for the war story. And which is such a different design philosophy than what I particularly resonate with, because I'm just like, what are you trying to do here? What are you trying to tell me? There's so much space. I don't see anything. It's also one of the reasons why I struggle with Nintendo. Please boo responsibly. But the idea that I think they just treat players differently. They treat players as these free agents who really just need prompts and be told that they can do something. They can go wherever they want. And it kind of brings me back to this idea of the expectation of the designer, or the expectation of the writer, or the expectation of the filmmaker, and the expectation of the person engaging with those media. And being, at what point do you decide that you're going to get your hands off and let the player do their thing? Because I don't think Christopher Nolan ever wants you to not know what's happening. And at the same time, oh gosh, I forget the name of this director, please forgive me. I've seen Korean filmmakers make these works that I'm just like, the only thing I can say is, what was that? And I can't wait to do it again. For designers, especially designers of digital games.
Yeah.
How do we
This
account
is
for
a great
reading?
question, because I would say I am not a person who advocates against authorial intent.
Yeah.
Okay, so I believe strongly, you guys know, you've all been in my classes, I believe in designing towards an experience. 100% I believe in that. What I also believe in is that the players will do what the players will do. So you design for an experience, and then you gracefully step back and allow the players to do what they do. It's almost like, I think of game design very much like designing a great dinner party.
No.
Okay?
Excellent.
You're gonna have a lovely environment with your music and your lighting and the food that you've prepared and the carefully chosen guest list of people you think will be interesting to one another, and you invite them over, and you make sure you introduce them properly and all these things, and then you just let it happen, right? So to me, there's authorial intent,
Yeah.
and then there's what happens. And I think all of it is wonderful. I think people walk in the door and at first they see your intent. They're like, oh, it feels so nice in here, or it smells so nice. Oh, I smell that like garlic cooking. Whatever it is, I feel so good about coming in this door. I feel so good about starting up this game. I get where you're going, right? And then I come with you over this hill and dale, and I come with you, through these places, right? And then my mind begins to wander. And then I start to bring more and more of myself to it, right? And then we're having a conversation, right? And so it's both, it isn't just what I want as a director. It isn't just the player being a player. It's both, and that's beautiful, right? It reminds me very much, this book is really highly influenced by Bernie DeKoven, by his thinking and by his influence on my life and work. Bernie insisted that games were for players, that they be by players, that we could change the rules whenever we want, that they be safe places for us. He insisted that the game itself was not what was important, that the play that we created was what was important, and that when something was well played, he thought of it as being that there was a wholeness, a wellness. The idea was that we come to a game and we bring it to life as players, and the play that we creates a wholeness in it, and there's a sense of wellness because of that, because we engage in that play with respect for ourselves, with respect for others, right? When we're done playing, we say, I'm going to take a break for a minute, right? I need to step out. Okay, when we all play these games together on the lawn, I always give you a little speech about how if you don't feel like playing, step out for a minute. Come back when you feel like playing, right? You have to acknowledge that we're seeking wellness, that we're seeking wholeness, and we're not seeking to shut ourselves down. We're seeking to open ourselves up.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's so funny you say that, and I think about career designers who are like, players want an escape. And I chafe because I've been in those rooms. I'm like, not this one. And
I want an experience.
I want an experience, but if I think
I
want
a
a good war story.
I want to be shocked and made to wonder. I'm like, oh, what is that?
Yeah.
I want to just be blown away by something so much bigger, than I don't want to be shut down.
No. I think about all of my favorite books and all my favorite pieces of fiction, and they always took me someplace that I didn't know existed. They always gave me something I didn't know I could feel. And when I try to tell other people what happened, I'm literally led by my emotions back to those places.
Yeah.
And
Bernie calls that the 19th hole. So after a game is played, where do we go to talk about what happened?
Yeah.
Where do we go to decompress and unpack? He calls it the 19th hole, which I think is sort of a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
I wonder if there are questions.
Yes. How are we doing on time?
We're sort of getting,
40 minutes.
Oh, cool. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have questions?
Yeah.
Jason? Hi.
Mic around.
Yes.
Oh, great idea.
There's a little bit of a microphone thing. Hi, everyone.
We don't have an extra microphone, so yes.
Thank you. All right. Hi. This was so wonderful and amazing. I'm so excited about the book. I loved what you briefly touched upon with play between adults and kids being so important.
Yeah.
And I kind of was hoping if we could extend that conversation a little bit more, especially into education, which is an interest of mine, and how we can use play to promote teaching, especially towards younger children like middle school and below?
Absolutely.
Sorry, can you introduce yourself as well?
Oh, yeah. I'm Jason. I'm a first-year MFA Interactive Media.
Awesome. So I think that playing together with parents and children is one of the most, first of all, it's one of the most valuable things that you can do. And I'm not just talking about video games. I mean, I also believe that playing board games with kids is a wonderful way of socializing, right? I remember when my niece was very young and we had a kind of an emotional thing around a board game where you won and lost, and it was very hard for her, the winning and the losing. So we had to step back, and I found these cooperative board games where we could win and lose together, and we could learn about winning and losing in a safe way, right? And I often think of that because my niece is funny. She's definitely grown up with games. She plays a lot. I would not know if she'd call herself a gamer, but she definitely plays a lot. And I think it's so healthy, right? Her relationship to games is that she's played a ton, but she doesn't form her identity around it. Does that make sense? And so I just think it's so wonderful because we sort of graduated up into playing Nintendo games, and then, you know, we still as a family play board games together. And when you play games with people, either video games or board games, there's this wonderful thing where you hold almost a tiny little miniature society amongst yourself, right? You can't do that. Yes, you can. Oh, no, you can't do that. Wait a minute. Let's look this up and see if you can. Okay, well, you can, but let's not have you do it in this today. Let's decide not to do it, and then you can. We can just basically vote and say, no, I think it would be better if we didn't have this rule, right? And it's weird because you can just take ownership of it. And again, I point back to Bernie, and Bernie DeKoven and his thing is games are for players by players. It's okay if we want to change. If we want to just switch the rules a little, just cause, then it's a beautiful discussion to have, like with a child. Let's switch the rules, right? Just a little bit, right? If we don't feel like doing it, oh hey, you can have an extra rule, just cause. It would be more fun that way. So let's do it that way, right? One of the things he says that I have always loved is he says, games are not objects to stand in judgment of us. And to me, when you play with a child, you can have discussions about that, about whether or not something applies, about whether or not we should or shouldn't go in this cave, and about, whether or not we should or shouldn't, pick up this item, or, what should we do next? What should we try next, right? And they're just such great discussions to have that how can you not be learning? How can you not be learning? You're learning to have discussions. You're learning to consider. You're learning to be together, right? So, to me, I think co-play is a really rich potential, and I think the extension of that would be literature circles in classrooms, to have games that we play and discuss the same way if we discuss, a book. Also, one of the things we talk about in the book is pairing books and games. So Walden is an obvious example where you pair the text of Walden with the game of Walden, but there are other, pairings where, for example, you could pair a game about moving to a new city with, say, something like unpacking, right? Or pair a game about a book like maybe Anne Frank with a game even like Darfur is Dying, right? Games about genocide with a book about genocide, right? There's many things we can think about where we can have discussions and co-play and bringing games into not just classrooms, but also informal learning with parents and children. Yeah. Thanks. Sure,
Thank
absolutely.
you so much, Tracy. Yeah. Yes.
I want to just keep this conversation.
Say your name.
Hello, My name is KB. I graduated from USC Games in 2023. Tracy, before, I forget where it was, but I watched you talk about play and learning, and I feel like we're kind of having this conversation, so
Yeah.
I'm going to keep going.
Yeah.
And you said something that stuck with me, which was basically that play is, we want education. You were talking about like systems of education and educational games. We want education to be efficient.
Yes.
And
Yes.
play is not efficient. It's
No.
inefficient. Can we talk about that?
Yes.
Since we're kind of
I
getting
think
into that?
this is one of the most unfortunate assumptions about education in our sort of industrial age, is that somehow we can make learning that is quick, that we can box it up, we can ship it out, and we can deliver it to people in a sort of like fast food kind of way, that you can consume it and then you have learned it, right? Well, I just think that's not how people operate, right? I feel play shows us, and Maynard already mentioned Plato's concept of play as a learning environment, but I think play shows us one of the truer ways that we learn, which is by experimenting, by trial and error, by failing. We learn by failing a lot, and that is inefficient. It would be so great if I could tell you, for example, how to design a game. But the best way is to have you fail to design a game. Now, I don't want you entirely to fail, so I do what's called scaffolding. I give you something that allows you to design to succeed to a certain extent and to have some pains of not quite realizing your dream, right? And that pain, that's growth. That's learning. It's inefficient. Everyone will experience it differently. And so I can't just check it off and say, KB has learned this, Jason needs to learn a little more. I can't check it off and just say this, right? It's not an efficient, learning is not efficient, I just think. And one of the wonderful things about play is it's not efficient either. It's not, people often believe that we can make learning games that sort of deliver the same kind of content that, say, a textbook does. And you will simply do a little level about math, and then you will understand fractions. And I just feel like this is a false concept, right? Unless maybe the little level has you fail and fail and fail and try and think and go back and puzzle and think, right? Then you might actually start to deduce something about math in that growth process. And that is, again, inefficient, but actually quite useful, right? My experience, though, is when people have asked me to design games about specifically math, is that they always just want you to get the right answer. I'm like, well, okay, but getting the right answer is fine if it's a test, I guess, but this isn't supposed to be a test. It's supposed to be a game, and a game is supposed to allow me to grow and learn and shift.
No right answer in a game.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so funny that you mentioned that, because I feel like the weirdest, a great example of a game for math that's out of left field is The Witness.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Because
okay.
that is a game about your assumptions.
Yes,
and
about
what you think is right.
what you think is right,
And
yes.
then finding out that that is not the case. And
Yeah.
I think that is so much closer to what math is.
Well, and it's closer to what games are, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that is the essence of it. And that game is particularly hard.
Yeah. I cried like 8 times in that game. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Please name yourself and say your question.
Wait, hold me. I'm Jack. I'm a first-year MFA. My question is that we were just talking about how games like don't have a right answer, or that there's not a right thing. But I feel like, especially here, we talk a lot about games having objectives and like places to go. So how do you think that? Like, what do you think a game without an objective, without somewhere to be? Why do you think that that's so uncommon, and why do we struggle to buy into something like that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So when I play a game, and this, I see this in all my design classes, and I see this also in myself as a player. you sit down as a player and you want to situate yourself, right? So you're like, okay, who am I? What do I need to do? Right? Here's all the stuff of this game. It's a screen, it's got stuff on it, or it's pieces, it's a board, I don't know. Like, there's some rules here, and I go, okay, I just got to figure out, like, who am I? What I need to do? How do I do it? Right? And so that's what I would call an efferent stance, by the way, just going back to the concepts in the book, right? I have a lot of information I need to kind of grok. I need to know, like what kind of game is this? And what are the things I'm going to get to try to do something, right? And so there's this efference to it. There's this pragmatism to the start of a game experience, right? And so part of that is I want to know what to do. I want to know what my objective is, right? And that pragmatism, that particularly sort of efferent viewpoint, is how we usually start games. Pretty much all games. I mean, even the most sort of like wild, open-ended game is probably going to start with a moment of, okay, here's what you get, here's maybe who you are, and here's what you have to do, kind of a thing, right? It's going to situate you in some way, right? And once that moment of efference is over, a game has the choice. Does it take me someplace else, and let me, forget about that for a moment, or does it double down on that efference, right? And there are a lot of games that double down on that, right? That double down on, like, okay, do this, do that, now do this, now do that. There are a lot of games that sort of double down on, like, the pointing yellow arrow of, like, you must do this. Focus on the goal, focus on the system, focus on getting the goal done, kind of a thing, right? And then there are other kinds of games that sort of, I would call it sort of, it's like a sponge. They go whoosh. I'm making a sound, I'm making a gesture. You can't see me online, but like, basically, once you understand that situation, they sort of let you go a little bit, right? They let you, whatever, maybe ride around or explore or think about other possibilities, or maybe sort things in a neat way, just looking at Anthony and thinking about your card game and I'm thinking about the meta game of, like, something, like Magic, where I play for hours by myself sorting things, right? There are, then I go in and then I'm battling, battle, 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 but then I go, ooh, cool, sorting, thinking, right? And I love the sorting part. I love this is me. I have a desire to talk and think about those open-ended spaces, right? So much so that the games that I've designed try to defeat that moment of what's my objective. So if you look at something like the Night Journey or Walden, we tried not to force you to have a clear objective. Some people don't like that. Some people, are like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do, right? But if they just wait a minute and breathe, it actually kind of becomes clear. And the possibilities of what you can do take over that general stance of, what do I need to do, right? And what you really need to do in something like Walden is just chill out. Chill out for a minute. Go for a walk. And I think this is a lesson, by the way, we all need to learn. We are all sort of, helicopter parents to ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. We're just like, what do I need to do next? What do I need to do next, right? And I'm like, hey, just chill out. Just breathe, right? And be in the game for a minute. Isn't it wonderful that we can play games? Have a moment where you say to yourself, isn't it wonderful that I can be in this game, whatever it is, right? If I'm playing cards with someone, just take a moment to look at that person and say, I'm playing cards with you. Isn't it fun, right? Or if you're in a beautiful world, just take a moment to breathe and say, like, wow, look at how beautiful this world is, I've never been to a place like this, or maybe I have been to a place like this. Kind of reminds me of that place that I dreamed of one time, right? Just breathe, right? That is the aesthetic space, the aesthetic attitude that you need, I think, to read games, as opposed to simply the efferent stance of, what do I got to do next? What do I got to do next? And I feel like we need more of that.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have one more question to close us out. I think it's a good one.
Yeah.
All right. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Excellent. Tracy,
Yes.
what book are you playing?
Oh, what book or what game?
What book are you playing, and what game are you reading now?
What book am I playing? You're doing a funny on me. Yeah, that's great. I thought you were going to ask me about games. Yeah. So that's
I did.
You did.
Book and a game.
You did.
A book
You
that you're
did.
playing and a game that you're reading.
You did. It's so interesting because I'm loath to tell you. It's a little embarrassing.
Oh, no, please give it to me.
Yeah, okay. I'm reading a book called Neurotribes.
Ooh.
It's about neurodivergence, specifically, neurodivergence, the history really of autism. It's super fascinating to me personally, and I am exploring my own neurodivergence, which I've never spoken about in public.
You can edit it out. It's totally fine.
I'm just sort of exploring that and trying to understand. Neurotribes is great because it goes historically back into the history of, our our treatment and mistreatment, I would say, of people who are different.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm playing Neurotribes. It's so odd because I'm actually reading the book on my
Audiobook?
So I am technically playing it.
Hey.
To go to your question.
I love winning.
And,
I'm kidding.
and I'm reading Indiana Jones and the Great Circle.
Oh, lovely.
And which is great. I know I'm a little behind. I'm like everybody else did it like in November, but I was like trying to get through the semester, and I was sick recently. And when you're sick, there's that moment when you can't do anything. Then there's that moment where you can only watch TV.
Yep.
And then as you get better, there's that moment where you can play games.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what happened. I was sick, and so I got Indiana Jones, and I started playing it, and it was just I just was playing it incessantly every day. But I don't know who's played it. Who's played it here? Anybody played it?
A bunch of grad students?
A bunch of grad students. They don't have time. Nobody has time. The beautiful thing about this game, so I am a child of the 70s, right? So I was right there when the first Indiana Jones came out. It was, right. It was like one of those amazing things, right, that turned your head around. Oh my God, Indiana Jones, right? Well, I don't want to spoil too much about this game, but the opening, what they did with the opening of the game is it is the first movie. You literally perform it. Excellent. So you are playing a memory that is so deep in your childhood brain. It is stuck somewhere, like back here. Like the poison, fresh 3 days. Right.
Excellent.
And you're playing it, and it's so crazy because it is exactly the movie. Like it is shot for shot for shot the movie, and then you are performing the Indiana Jones, and you know what to do because you have seen it 1,000 times. And it's just really. It was shocking because I didn't read anything about the game before I played it. I just popped it in, and it was like, sick. Ginger ale, Indiana Jones, right? And it started out, and then I was just entranced by the way that the media were colliding in my mind.
Yeah.
The media of film and remembering shot for shot and the music and just everything and then then the playing and the performance, and it was just, I was like, wow, I was blown away. But then I've got farther in the game, and of course, it's an entirely different story and an entirely different world in it, and it's its own thing.
Yeah.
So I'm only commenting on the first part of it because I don't want to spoil too much. But
What a smart thing to do. Like, as we were talking about it, my sister is a huge fan of Indiana Jones. I've only seen the movies once. But I was thinking about, like, oh man, leverage your memory, leverage the film, leverage the opening of the games. I was like, you were
what better way to tutorialize us?
Like, what a straight shot to success.
It was a straight shot to your heart.
100%.
Went right to your, like, childhood heart.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Oh, such a good idea.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Love it.
Don't ask me what book I'm playing. I don't read. No, but truthfully, I think the last thing I finished reading was the last thing I finished reading, which I'm now playing over in my mind, is oh my gosh, Oscar Wilde's Picture of Dorian Gray.
Oh yeah.
Also on audiobook.
Yeah.
Which
Well,
I have
who
come
doesn't?
around.
Yeah.
I've come around on. I thought, like,
You thought it was cheating, but no, it's
Yes.
not. It's great.
But and some things you realize language also comes alive when you speak it.
I think so too.
And I can't forget the feeling I got when I pressed play, went about my cleaning, and for some reason the opening paragraphs where they're describing I want to say cherry blossoms, but describing the blooming trees outside the window where, you know, one of the main characters is just lounging. It was so painterly, which was intentional because one of the people in the room is painting.
Yeah.
That was an experience where I literally got to see words turn into image in front of my eyes, and I just stopped. I was like, oh, this is why people read.
I don't think we read aloud enough, to be honest with
No.
you. It's I think one of the great pleasures is to have a book read to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a game I'm reading, The Great Ace Attorney Chronicles.
Oh!
Oh, that's a great game, y'all. Sorry. I can go on forever, but we'll stop here. Thank you so much,
Oh,
Tracy.
thank you.
you, everyone, for
Thank
staying
you,
along
everyone.
and hearing
Great.
us talk. I had a great time. Thanks for all the great questions. And coming at you from USC Games and the Games Innovation Lab, I'm Maynard Hearns, signing off. Perfect.